Shouldn't. That's your phone, right?
Hey, all right. So we got somebody. All right, what's up, everybody? I'm on my way to chemo in Syracuse, and my best friend for how long have we been friends for?
Since 1990.
1990 something. He is. We're gonna get into clinical trials because that's what he does. He works for a one of the top worldwide international clinical trial companies, and thought we'd get into that and get his perspective on it. So yeah, this is my friend Mike Glassman. He's driving, so we'll try not to cause an accident or. So anyway, all right, Mike. So tell me your position and kind of what you do.
Sure. So I work in the realm of clinical research, which, as you know, when drugs get put to the market, they have to go through a process. It's called clinical trials. And I've got a lot of experience in oncology, among other therapeutic areas. So, as Steve mentioned, I work for a large international clinical research organization, which are the big drug companies that make the drugs. They commission us to run the clinical trials to make sure they're not biased and that they're following all the FDA rules. So my title is Director of Clinical Leads. When you lead a clinical trial, you have an entire clinical team that I manage and work with top-notch doctors around the globe to set up the clinical trials. So really what Steve wanted me to do is kind of give a quick backgrounder on what's involved with studies, what happens to these drugs, how do they get, from bench to bedside. And it's quite a lot, costs billions of dollars, lots of time. And there are some misconceptions and preconceived notions about clinical trials. I'm sure everyone's heard of, I don't want to be a guinea pig, or, placebo-controlled trials. And those are, old school philosophical sort of paradigms that are kind of outgrown themselves, if you will. And by that I mean there's certain types of trials, like normal healthy patients that go into clinical research. When they newly develop a drug, they have to make sure that it's safe. They do that in healthy volunteers. Those are your typical placebo dose escalation trials, where you're either getting nothing, or you're getting incrementally increasing doses until you feel sick, and that's how they establish what dose they're going to start with and that kind of thing. Then when it gets to late stage trials, that's when you start hearing about a randomized, controlled clinical trial. And a lot of people, that's where they get tripped up with, oh, I'm going to get a placebo and not treatment, which is really not the case. There's obviously ethical concerns with that. So in oncology trials, just about everybody gets therapy, and the control arm is not placebo, it's standard of care. So it's either what they usually give against a new compound or new set of compounds to treat cancer. So that's the scoop for the randomized controlled clinical trials. What else do you want me to talk about, Steve?
Well, so where to start? Basically, I know that you could start by talking to your oncologist, but sometimes it's like getting more opinions. You may have to go to other hospitals or other cancer clinics to find out about clinical trials, right? Because they're not in every location.
Right, finding out. So that's a good question. Where do I find a clinical trial if I have cancer? Well, you can start by looking at the website of your current healthcare provider for your cancer. Usually their website, if they're a big academic institution, they'll have a link that'll say clinical research or clinical trials. Or you can just go to your, medical center's main website, or your healthcare provider's main website, and usually there's a search function in there, a little, icon of a picture of a magnifying glass. Click on that, type in clinical trials, and you should get directed. And if your oncologist isn't running any clinical trials, that doesn't mean that you can't find them. There's a bunch of different companies out there that actually their sole purpose is to make sure that patients like yourselves are aware of clinical trials in the particular cancer that you have. One of which is called Thompson's Center Watch. Just Google that. It's public domain, nothing confidential there. It's a pretty decent organization where they advertise clinical trials. You can also go to the federal government's webpage, that's sponsored by the FDA, so to speak. It's called clinicaltrials.gov, spelled one word just as I said it, clinicaltrials.gov. And there you'll find a search engine with advanced search features where you can type in exactly what country, what state, what phase of trial that you're on. And I think I probably should elaborate a little bit more on that. So the different phases of clinical trials, because you're probably, well, which one is good for me? It's not going to be
Right.
phase 1. It's not going to be early stage because those typically are healthy volunteers. You want, the studies that are geared toward late stage, almost to market, either pre-market or even some studies that actually are looking at the drug in a longer term longitudinal study, which means they follow patients over longer periods of time than the studies that occurred right before the FDA stamped their approval on it. You can look for those. Those are stage 4 or post-market evaluation type of studies or long-term follow-up studies. Those are always good. But you can go to the clinicaltrial.gov website, look at the search engine, phase 3 and phase 4. There's little tick boxes for those. You can click on that, and then that will, further filter your search for late-stage trials. Then there's another section at the bottom of there that you'll see that'll say sponsor. So you can either have industry sponsored, which is the big drug companies. Those are always very elaborately constructed studies, well designed. Drug companies, they are multi-billion-dollar corporations, but they're also they're very passionate about their research. I've worked with just about every pharmaceutical there is out there, and they genuinely do a really good job in designing their clinical trials to make sure they're safe. And that's why we have companies like the one I work for that manages, monitors, and makes sure that everyone's following all the rules. So you can find those industry sponsored studies by ticking industry sponsor on the clinicaltrials.gov search engine. And you can also find National Institutes of Health sponsored trials. Those are federally funded studies. Those are also well designed too. They're all good. They have the patient's perspective in mind. Obviously these drug companies are putting these out there to provide safe and effective sort of tools for the cancer patients to fight their cancer. So, having said that you really want to check that out. It's a very helpful website, and it'll allow you to find a study that fits your particular cancer, and then you can go to the study locations and see where those are, because they generally list the state and the institution that is participating in that clinical trial. So you can find it, and then you can just go to that institute's website and look there, or you can bring this information to your healthcare provider and say, look, I found this study on clinicaltrials.gov. This is the type of cancer that I have. It's a late stage. What do you think? Get your doctor's opinion on it. Obviously, they'll do their research. So I think that's important to note that. So that's how you find clinical studies. And there's also research centers that do nothing but clinical research, and you can search that. You can just put clinical trials near me. You can type that in, and you might see certain healthcare providers that you've heard of that you really didn't know participate in research. You might see those pop out, or you might see, like John Doe Clinical Research Clinic, a proprietary standalone clinic that specifically focuses on clinical trials, meaning that's pretty much their bread and butter. Those are really good places to go to. So that's where you go to find a clinical trial. So hopefully folks find that helpful.
Yeah, so that's good points, and we want to continue saying get multiple consults. Obviously, if I don't have any experience in the clinical trials because I don't really have a mutation of my cancer, and it is being responsive to the conservative treatment of chemo so far. But I would suggest you got to advocate for yourself. And if you want to do a clinical trial, like Mike said, you got to do your research. You can't just just ask one doctor and put it on them. I know that you could be tired. I know it can be exhausting doing the research and trying to really go above and beyond and do whatever you have to do to fight the cancer. But that's where you can get help. Get help from your family, your loved ones, friends, to help you, do some research on the back end too. Because the only one that's going to advocate for yourself, the strongest, is you. So just by asking, one doctor what you should do is not enough. I mean, you might find the right guy, but even if you do and you find the right oncologist and gives you the right, good treatment and is taking care of you and you're showing progress, always want to get a second or third opinion. Anyway, it doesn't hurt. It's not like a second opinion on a job, right, or a project around the house. It's your life, so you have to. You have to. Yeah, and so Mike has actually, not recently because of the pandemic and everything else going around, but you've actually traveled across the globe to some countries, right, in order to support some of these trials or to monitor them, right?
Yeah, so when a clinical trial starts up, uh, they put their market application not just for the United States but for other countries because cancer is a worldwide epidemic. Uh, Not per se an epidemic as infectious disease in terms of numbers, but it's people are affected worldwide with cancer. It's not just in the U.S. A lot of people think that the U.S. maybe do a lot more clinical studies than a lot of the other countries. I don't know that that's true. I know that a lot of the studies that I work on, they are big international studies. I've had to go to other countries and run what's called investigator meetings, and that's where I go out and train all the research physicians on how to properly set up the study. Every study, you have to follow a recipe, which is called the protocol. I think it's good for cancer patients to know what that term means because, a lot of doctors will talk to you and say, well, according to the protocol, and the protocol says this, and you might scratch your head and say, what the heck is a protocol? It's the recipe to do a clinical study, and I think it's important to note that when you do a study, you have to have a sample representative of the study population. And is that just in the U.S.? No, it's worldwide. So there's a subset of patients that come in to these big studies from all over the world, not just from the U.S. So I've had to go across overseas quite far, some as long as 14, 15-hour flights to meet us at a central location where a number of different physicians from other countries can meet and we can train them on that. So we have to start up studies in each country, which has their own separate regulations. And believe it or not, some people think that, oh, well, that study was done in Europe. I don't, trust that data. Um, Believe it or not, there are global, worldwide standards in clinical research. It's called ICH, or International Conference of Harmonization. You can Google that. Sounds like a very sophisticated term, but when you see what it really means, it's pretty much setting up a standard. So when you do a study anywhere, you can compare it and pull all the data together. Let's pull Europe, um, Asia Pacific, Latin America, and North America, pull all that data to see how well this cancer drug works and do the number crunching that these biostatisticians do. So I think that's important to note because a lot of people, see these clinical trials and they're like, oh, well, it's approved in Europe, but what does that mean? Did they do a good job? Well, of course they did. Every government agency has standards. The FDA is rigid, and so are every other regulatory agency across the globe in every country. Japan, China, they all have ethics committees that have to review research to make sure that it's scientifically sound. So there's no, guinea pig action going on. There's no, you know, sometimes there is falsification of data, but that's why the governments and the regulatory agencies have the processes in place, and that's why I have my job, to make sure that the studies are set up correctly, conducted correctly, and everyone's following the rules. So you are protected. So when you sign up for a study, just know that. But I think that international thing is an important piece that a lot of people forget. That these studies are done all over the globe.
Yeah, absolutely. We're all in this together. So, yeah. So, is there anything, any other tips or any other suggestions you want to tell the audience out there?
I think just if you're considering your current treatment and you're running out of options, make sure that your doctor doesn't forget clinical trials because they are a viable option. There is some new drugs that aren't passed yet, and some devastating forms of cancer like glioblastoma multiforme is the one that pops in my mind first. Just a very aggressive type of neoplasm in the brain, and it's very rapid, and sometimes it just doesn't respond to treatment. And other cancers that are like that too, you might find yourself in a situation where you've exhausted all the options, you've had every treatment there is, and nothing else is working. So there's compassionate use sort of pathways for cancer patients to get drug treatments that aren't approved by the FDA yet, but are still safe and effective, because those are out there too. So I would say my advice is do your homework, talk to your doctor about a clinical trial if that is what you're, heading toward and you want to know more about it. Your doctor will definitely be versed in clinical trials. When physicians prescribe treatments, they go pretty much based on their own experience. And if you have a doctor that's well versed in clinical trials, typically those are, every doctor's good, but sometimes you have these doctors that just go above and beyond, and they want to push the frontiers of science and medicine, and they do so by doing these clinical trials, and they have to apply more rigid, I guess, guidelines to patient care because you're in a clinical trial. So in effect, you're really getting looked at a lot more than you usually would in standard of care. So, standard of care is great. It's, I'm not saying that clinical research is better than standard of care. It's just more scrutinizing because you have to collect every piece of information, every piece of data when you sign up for a study so that they can look at it and make sure that everything's going well. So hopefully all that made sense.
Awesome stuff. So those that missed out in the beginning, me and Mike, we've been friends since forever, the 90s.
Yeah, nursing school. We went to nursing school together.
Yeah, nursing school.
Way back when.
Yep. So and those that missed it out in the beginning, he's a director lead, right, for a international
director. Yeah, for a big international contract research organization, or CRO. You can Google that too. I know we're telling everyone to Google everything. Google is actually pretty good. You can actually find a lot of helpful information on Google. It'll take you to other websites like Mayo Clinic, which obviously is pretty reputable. But yeah, Google, contract research organization to see kind of what that's all about if you're interested.
Yeah. So, all right, guys, continue to believe, strength, persevere, never surrender. Clean hoodie. Look at that clean hoodie. Oh yeah. We got a couple of podcasts coming out. We got one that I interviewed with Bailey O'Brien. Her story was in chapter 2, I believe, of Radical Hope by Kelly Turner, PhD. If you guys listening have not read any of Kelly Turner's books, you need to. Radical Remissions and Radical Hope. Get your copy. It'll change your life. And then I did another podcast that's coming out with Karen Varley from the UK. A radical remission herself. Unbelievable story of ovarian cancer and how she beat it. The silent killer. So that's going to be out hopefully this week as well. And we're just going to keep pumping out information for you guys. Hopefully this was helpful. And we'll see you guys on the next episode. See ya.